More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries
Mr. Chairman, señor Presidente, con 26 delegaciones en el Simón Bolívar tenemos el quórum para proseguir. Gracias.
We have quorum. We have 26 delegations. Thank you.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Secretary. Good afternoon. I have the honor to bring this special meeting of the Permanent Council to order, convened in compliance with the mandate established by the General Assembly, Resolution 3029, with the aim of addressing the implementation of all aspects of the Inter-American Democratic Charter and its challenges, paying special attention to the role of disinformation and false information. Before adopting the agenda, I'd like to express our sincere thanks and recognition to Ambassador Sebastián Kralevich, permanent representative of Chile, in his capacity as chair of the voluntary group for the follow-up to the Inter-American Democratic Charter, as well as his team, and to all member states that make up this voluntary group. Their dedication and collaboration has been instrumental in organizing this meeting. And indeed, this was the first meeting that we programmed with Chile before we assumed the chairmanship. And so we show that this is important, the coordination. So today we face a crucial issue for strengthening our democracies, the full implementation of the Inter-American Democratic Charter, an instrument that, although it is not an international treaty, is of transcendental importance together with our charter for defending democracy in the Americas. In that regard, the purpose of this meeting is to identify the main challenges we face on this path, including the phenomena of disinformation and manipulation of information, which threaten public trust and the effective exercise of our democratic rights, and it also undermines the rule of law and democratic norms. In this context, our objective is to have an arena for reflection on how to improve our collective responses to these challenges and guarantee or identify, effective mechanisms to counter disinformation and guarantee access to truth as a right for all citizens. In other words, our objective is to create a space for reflection and analysis on defending the truth, and hence the importance of this issue. With this in mind, I propose we move on to the adoption of the agenda. In accordance with Rule 43 of the Rules of Procedure of the Permanent Council, I submit for the Council's consideration the draft agenda reflected in document CP/OD 2533/25. If there are no comments, we will adopt this order of business. Adopted. Item 2 is the implementation of all aspects of the Inter-American Democratic Charter and its challenges, which we face in fully implementing it, in particular the role of disinformation and the spread of false information. Protection of democracy in our region is of vital importance, and current challenges like disinformation demand priority attention. It is essential that member states reflect on how to strengthen the implementation of the Inter-American Charter in the face of these phenomena that threaten stability and confidence in our democracies. To begin our discussion, I have the honor of welcoming Ms. Gloria de la Fuente, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Chile, who will be with us virtually. Madam Deputy Minister, welcome to the OAS Permanent Council. Madam, you have the floor. Please go ahead, madam. We can see you. And we can hear you. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to the distinguished ambassadors, to Secretary General Luis Almagro, Assistant Secretary General Nestor Mendez, alternate representatives, observer missions, and staff of the General Secretariat, and a special welcome or greetings to our ambassador. Thank you, Chair, for this invitation to present at this special meeting of the Permanent Council. I think this is a very current issue, and I think it is urgent also. We have to think about what's happening and what can we do to save our democracies in a context of so many challenges, and this is extremely important and transcendental. Thank you for your introduction, and you talked about the challenges of false information, because recently when we talked about news, or fake news, we thought news was truthful. And we see something fake or false, we don't think it's news. However, this idea of fake news is so frequent now that we forget that it's an oxymoron, and it shows the complex challenges our democracies face in the region and worldwide. As you know, here at this council, we are taking incipient steps to fight this. And since we are in the vanguard, we have to deal with these challenges front on. The challenges of misinformation and fake news is being taken in a context of undermining of our democracies. And I'm thinking of surveys like Latino Barometro and others where we see that support for democracy is under 60%. And what this means is that this is insufficient for those who believe in democracy. Democracy is not perfect, but it's the best thing that we have to be able to tackle challenges and the problems our societies face. The first steps we are taking at this organization are appropriate but insufficient given the magnitude of the problem of disinformation. And 22 states who are in this volunteer group to follow up on the Inter-American Charter, we think they need to draw up activities. For example, when do we have a content that alleges to be news but is really fake news? And how can we stop its dissemination? And so the question is, how can we multiply these activities so that this is not just an embryonic activity limited to the OAS? How can we make the leap, the important leap, so that our public civil servants throughout the region, our diplomats, our leaders in media, and citizens themselves who can train themselves, and so that we can all be an obstacle to the dissemination of fake news and disinformation, which is eroding the quality of our democracies. Now, challenges to democracy in the Americas are not limited to disinformation. It goes beyond this. And we can mention, for example, that in keeping with the inter-American democracy, it is a guide for us so that we can understand democracies, because democracies are complex and they are multidimensional, and we have different approaches to democracy. And we've seen that in the debates that we've had here in the Permanent Council about the Charter. There are states, for example, that emphasize development, others that talk about the quality of institutions, others that talk about the separation of powers. And we have very unequal societies. Some say that's very important, for example, that there are so many aspects in the Charter. And in this context of news that's coming at us so fast, and in Chile, we think that multilateral spaces, despite their imperfections, and you know that well, these spaces are where we can have valuable debates to be able to engage in dialogue, come up with good practices to tackle challenges. And it's not about who is right or wrong. It's not black and white. Rather, how can we understand each other through respect and non-intervention? And it's always important to take lessons from others and move forward collectively to tackle the challenges that democracies face, which we are facing daily. nationally and regionally. We need to sit down together, take this on in a trans-border way. We face many dilemmas, and so it's very useful to learn lessons from others' experiences that have been undertaken in the Americas. So given this wave of disinformation and the complex challenges we face, it is important to have dialogue like this one so that these efforts become systematic. For example, in Chile, we'd like to know what's going on in the Caribbean, in North America, and other parts of the Americas. We want cooperation that is more fruitful, more horizontal, and ongoing. With that, Chair, with this perspective and our commitment as a country, we believe it is possible that our states can improve our democracies through collaboration at a time when this is more necessary than ever. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias. Agradecemos.
Thank you so very much. We are sincerely in your debt. Thank you for sharing your perspective on this important issue. Now, we would like to welcome the special rapporteur from the IACHR, Pedro Vaca, my friend, and I would like to offer him the floor to speak. You have the floor, sir. Thank you very much, Ambassador Arce, Chair of the Permanent Council, who's here with me at the head table, and greetings to all delegations at this special meeting. I'd like to begin by thanking Chile and all member states who are part of the voluntary group on the Inter-American Democratic Charter. Because thanks to their efforts, we've been able to reflect on the Inter-American Democratic Charter in the context of the challenges of this region. And I'm so happy to see that in the last 6 months, the group has been thinking about the integrity of information, disinformation, its link to democracy in the Americas. Now, Chair, delegations, I wanted to share some things with you. The concept of the integrity of information, it's a challenge to define this. The deputy minister was saying this. It has to do with the forum of deliberation. Maybe in some senses it overlaps with the idea of the public space. And who are the people in a democratic society who can express themselves freely with no restrictions and no reprisals against them? And so this fits perfectly in the Inter-American Democratic Charter in all its aspects. And in the practice, disinformation leads us to a deeper problem. What are the common points of reference for all sectors in a diverse society, to have a common denominator, to be able to deliberate from a perspective of diversity and take decisions that impact all of society? I also wanted to share the experience in the region. I don't want to simplify something that has been debated in the community of freedom of expression. For example, there is the verification of content, the fact-checking, and media has developed specialized units to give responses to questions about whether content is truthful or not. I think all of us here believe that this is important when there are topics that are of public interest. Now, the second experience that I wanted to refer to has to do with institutional fora, for example, at different levels in the judicial branch and the legislative branch, there are parliaments, for example, that have participated in this conversation as part of their competence. Now, then we have a multilateral conversation or concept in the OAS. There are different conversations. The rapporteurship, I've been here since 2021. We have a report on digital content, and it referred specifically to recommendations to the states to deal with these challenges. And if we want to see this in comparative or comparatively, the European Union also has guidelines on this. Now, I want to highlight that from the beginning of the Internet, we have a multi-stakeholder conversation that has been part of the Internet, and in different fora of governance on the Internet, where we have a framework with stakeholders, we have platforms, we have the technological community, private public sectors, academia. There have been conversations which have had an impact on the terms of reference of the different platforms with which we interact, both publicly and privately. So platforms have given labels to content. They've upgrading content, downgrading of content, elimination of accounts. It's a very broad portfolio, and the report I referred to on digital content speaks to all of these if you're interested. Now, I also wanted to say at this point in my intervention, I've been here for about 4 years. And I believe this conversation is seen as something external, which really doesn't call upon us to deal with directly. But I think that in our rapporteurship and in the ISCHR, we have thought that really it is something that we need to deal with directly and has to do with us directly. It has to do with journalists. It has to do with those who are in entertainment. And it's not in vain that during elections we see that maybe stars, entertainment stars, have an influence. Political parties are involved. Governance structures of platforms. And in the recent past, we've seen a lot of volatility. Many conversations can change because of political changes. And I have 1 minute left, Chair, and I want to wrap up. What's important? What's newsworthy? What's the basis of democracy that the Inter-American Charter provides for? And I believe that in a democratic society, voices need to be accountable with respect to news and information. Disinformation or fake news is terrible, but what's really terrible is that authorities might be spreading fake news. Well, I want to talk about having a democracy where we deliberate, where we're not fighting in the trenches, where we can talk about issues of public interest, where we have a common denominator. And with respect to these deep issues, I think you can look at our report on governance and digital content. And I thank you for allowing me to speak. I would like to thank Pedro Vaca, the Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Thank you for your valuable contributions and your contributions to your rapporteurship. This is key to continue implementing the Inter-American Democratic Charter, and we thank you for your work to defend the truth.
Moving on then, colleagues, to our third item on the agenda, we have to receive the summary of activities carried out by the voluntary group for follow-up to the Inter-American Democratic Charter. And I hope that this group that has played a fundamental role in the follow-up of the implementation of the Charter and in promoting its principles and values. with a view to sharing with the entire membership the most recent activities and developments. I am very pleased to give the floor to Ambassador Sebastian Kraljevic, permanent representative of Chile and chair of the voluntary follow-up group to the Inter-American Democratic Charter, who will provide us with a summary of the efforts made by the group in this area. Ambassador Kraljevic, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Looking as of the 7th of August, 2024 to now, I have been chair of the group based on the principles for coordination, dialogue, and transparency in compliance with the mandates that the group was guided by in resolution, omnibus resolution, that is to say, of strengthening democracies at the General Assembly last. And we have coordinated the 20-some-odd members of the states, and they fulfilled the following activities. On the 11th of September 2024, in the Council, 23 years of the Charter was celebrated, and at that time, the main focus was information, and a dialogue started on regulations, public policy, good practices, in addition to the thematic links to human rights and the private sector. And then afterwards, there was a workshop for polarization that was spoken about. This is a tool to look at some of the other aspects, the practical aspects spoken about by Mr. Saldaña from the Republic of Chile, and there was participation of member states on that issue as well. A second discussion took place on policies focused on financing and electoral campaigns, political parties, and understanding the mechanisms for financing, transparency and accountability, oversight, and electoral or democratic elections. This was done with authorities, academia from Uruguay, Canada, the United States, and civil society organizations and international organizations. In compliance with another one of the mandates of the last General Assembly, during the various meetings of the group, proposals were offered to strengthen democracy in the hemisphere in keeping with the Inter-American Democratic Charter and the Charter of the OAS. So along this line, representative from Chile, the United States, I would like to underscore that this proposal was submitted independent of the states that were mentioned, and it didn't mean that there was a consensus from the group on them or on it. The two proposals that were previously mentioned have a strict mandate presented at the General Assembly, and it was submitted on the 23rd of January at the CAJP, in addition to formal comments made by the United States and Brazil. So this doesn't imply a consensus by all members of the group, of course. Now, over the course of this quarter, we have had the participation of different authorities. The Deputy Minister, Mrs. Fuente, the legal issues expert, Mr. Morrison from Canada, Secretary General of the Community of Democracies, Mr. Alamenas. And I've given you this brief overview, and I'd like to thank all delegations for your participation, for your constructive participation, and all the group of conferences, and for all those who participated in the different tasks of the group. So with this, we have fulfilled our quarter, Mr. Chairman. And now it's up to the other members to present their nominations for this position in the future. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Ambassador Kraljevic, for your very detailed report and for sharing with this permanent council the progress made by the voluntary group for follow-up to the Inter-American Democratic Charter. Their dedication and leadership in this effort are critical to strengthening the implementation, particularly with the first chair that was under Ambassador Mora from the United States of America. And I would also like to highlight the valuable work of all the members of the voluntary group: Antigua and Barbuda, Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Grenada, Guatemala, Mexico, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Suriname, Bahamas, the United States, and Uruguay, whose constant and committed work has been key to continue to promote and monitor the effective implementation of the Inter-American Democratic Charter. The Inter-American Democratic Charter, perhaps, is the document and looks like a treaty, but it's a document that's been around for more than 20 years, and it has been critical importance to defend democratic institutions and the rule of law and human rights in many different senses. To strengthen it and to have it equally used by all is critical work in which this group can contribute. And in this regard, then, I echo the invitation of the members of the group to move ahead with a new group, as has been done very sterlingly by the delegation of Chile. Let's move on to the next item on our agenda then. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to open the floor for comments, and I would like to invite delegations to take the floor so that they can share their various and sundry viewpoints for cooperation in terms of the implementation of the Inter-American Democratic Charter, as well as some of the current challenges, such as disinformation and the spread of false information. These are topics of utmost importance on which I should like to respectfully invite delegations to take the floor. I give the floor to the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, democracy is under threat in many parts of the world, including countries that have long claimed to be champions of democracy and human rights. Democratic institutions are also under siege, and in many cases, they appear to be weakening. That is our situation today. The constitutional order in numerous member states faces unprecedented challenges, eroding the very foundations upon which democracy stands. Feeding the rise of these unwelcome phenomena is the deliberate use of misinformation and disinformation, now amplified by artificial intelligence, making it increasingly difficult to distinguish fact from fiction. Even more troubling is the deliberate spread of falsehoods, not by rogue actors alone, but by figures of great authority in member states, weaponized as a tool for persuasion. This development corrodes public trust, distorts democratic discourse, and ultimately weakens the Inter-American Democratic Charter itself. Mr. Chairman, if ever there was a time for institutions and peoples to stand up firmly in defense of the tenets of the Charter, that time is now. We find ourselves in a period of great uncertainty and trepidation. The only path back to trust, stability, and confidence in a rules-based international order is through the unwavering respect for democracy by all nations and a firm commitment by all institutions to uphold the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter, the OAS Charter, and particularly the Inter-American Democratic Charter. No single nation can meet this challenge alone, Mr. Chairman. The defense of democracy is a collective responsibility, and the OAS, as the leading multilateral institution in the Americas, has a duty to ensure that the Inter-American Democratic Charter remains a living, enforceable instrument, not just an aspirational document. The Charter provides a clear framework for the protection of democratic institutions, the rule of law, and the fundamental rights of citizens, and its implementation must be reinforced with renewed urgency, albeit with due regard to the principles of non-interference in the internal affairs of states. But, Mr. Chairman, we all know when that line between interference in the international affairs of states on the one hand and the involvement of the rest of the community is crossed. And essentially, we are seeing that cross occurring. At the same time, we must develop a cooperative and effective policy to address the use of social media platforms for the dissemination of disinformation and misinformation, which is now fast becoming a norm. We ought not to live in a world where every statement and every claim must be relentlessly fact-checked to see if they are true or not. Such an environment breeds distrust, and distrust breeds hostility. Hostility, in turn, leads to conflict, conflict that must be avoided at all costs if our shared planet is to remain politically stable, economically prosperous, and peaceful for the benefit of all our peoples. Mr. Chairman, Antigua and Barbuda remains steadfast in its commitment to these principles, which are vital to us as a small state. But we suggest that they are now equally vital to us all, big or small, rich or poor. Therefore, we urge all member states, to act with urgency and resolve in preserving democracy and rights in our hemisphere and globally. And we encourage the active work of this particular working group on this issue, with very careful attention to disinformation and misinformation from whatever source it comes, because it has cast us into a situation right now of deep uncertainty and worry. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much to the Ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda. I give the floor to the Ambassador of Canada. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's very interesting to have had the Ambassador of Chile as Special Rapporteur. And we would like to thank him for that presentation, which is on a presentation which is of utmost importance. Democracy is at the heart of well-governed democracies, and this is now being threatened internally and externally and exacerbated by technology. This is exacerbated in the current world, and it manifests itself in multilateral environments, as well as geopolitical and economic arenas, as well as by the internal disruption that is taking place in English.
Authoritarian and illiberal regimes are growing in influence and are increasingly contesting democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. They are also directly undermining the democratic strength of individual states, notably through electoral interference, manipulating public discourse through disinformation, and threatening individuals, including reprisals against human rights defenders. Perhaps the most extreme example in our region is that of Nicolas Maduro's Venezuela, that has seen a serious democratic erosion. The regime has suppressed dissent, curtailed freedoms, and undermined electoral integrity. In fact, on January 10th, and against the will of the Venezuelan people as expressed at the ballot box on July 28, 2024, Maduro proceeded to illegitimately inaugurate himself as president of Venezuela. This could only happen in a context of harsh repression where dissident and free information have no place, whether it be in the streets, in public debate, or on social media. The Maduro regime has been particularly effective in harassing independent media workers to the point that they can only operate by practicing self-censorship to avoid consequences for themselves and their families. In a similar vein, Maduro has also been effective in orchestrating disinformation campaigns to manipulate public opinion and to threaten, harass, and discredit dissenting voices, including independent journalists, activists, and members of the opposition. The case of Venezuela shows that control over information is at the center of authoritarian rule. Mr. Chair, democratic governance, while imperfect, to be sure, is still the best system to deliver the things that matter most to people: peace and security, sustainable development, social benefits, respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, and providing people with the agency and a voice in decisions that affect their lives. Canada remains strongly committed to democracy in the hemisphere. It is at the core of Canada's international engagement and a key component of Canada's feminist foreign and international assistance policies. Mr. Chair, we are very grateful and would like to extend our thanks to the excellent leadership of Chile as chair of the voluntary group in support of the Inter-American Democratic Charter. We commend Chile's efforts in the coordination of the group's meetings and discussions that enabled us to learn, exchange, and put forward ideas towards strengthening democracy in our hemisphere. Chile's hard work, which included choosing the topics, the panelists, and everything related to logistics, was not only timely and excellent, but it allowed us to have meaningful exchanges on our shared experiences and how we can work together to strengthen democracy in our region. Canada was especially pleased to present a panelist for the Money and Politics workshop, as well as provide information on our technical assistance program and judiciary technical cooperation. In closing, Mr. Chair, I would like to share Canada's belief that the Inter-American Democratic Charter remains a living document reflecting our collective commitment to maintaining and strengthening democracy in the hemisphere. Let us keep with this and keep it in our hearts and minds as we continue to work in the voluntary group and indeed across all our efforts here at the OAS. Democracy should always be at the heart of our actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador of Canada. The distinguished Ambassador of Mexico has the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My delegation has taken due note of the comments made reiterating Mexico's commitment with democratic values and its promotion in the hemisphere in keeping with international law and the principles of legal equality of states respecting sovereignty and non-intervention. These are crucial elements in the foundationing charter of the OAS and the international order based on rules. There is no one model of democracy, and each state has the sovereign right to define and strengthen its own democratic system in keeping with its own circumstances and the needs of its peoples. The Inter-American Democratic Charter is a critical reference point in this regard, and application should be guided by the purposes and principles established in the OAS Charter and with an integral approach that addresses not only the political and electoral aspects, but also education as a key factor to strengthen democratic institutions, the promotion of social development, elimination of discrimination, a reduction of poverty, and full-fledged equal participation of women in political life. In the context of this session mandated by the General Assembly of the OAS in 2024 on the follow-up and implementation of the Inter-American Democratic Charter, Mexico offers a clarion call for the use which we feel is fruitful, respecting the sovereignty of states and avoiding any kind of action that goes against the will of the people. When the Charter is applied adequately in all due respect and in dialogue with the states involved, the results have been very fruitful. On the other hand, when it has been used without considering the states, it has been inefficient in most cases. Mexico supports the work and the multilateral initiatives that allow for dialogue and cooperation so as to promote democratic values in the hemisphere, and particularly paying attention to the topics that have to do with education, gender equity, and the rights of indigenous peoples, immigrants, and the building of more fair, inclusive societies. Our country has achieved major advances in the last few years that have allowed for consolidating a equal government with the first female president, bigger numbers of governors that are women in high-flying posts in the history of Mexico. This shows the democratic commitment of our society. The digital area has brought in significant challenges for democracy, such as the propagation of disinformation and hate speeches, which are direct threats to freedom of expression and access to objective, true information. And in addition, it erodes the social fabric and trust in democratic institutions, with the potential of being factors for social, political, and economic destabilization. Mexico truly believes and is convinced of the importance that free media outlets have, which are independent and diverse, as well as access to information based on facts and scientific information. A specific example of our efforts is the exercise of transparency and accountability, which is seen daily by the President of Mexico with morning conferences establishing direct dialogue with the population. This has allowed us to speak to critical issues for national life, in addition to combating or contextualizing disinformation and false information. Mexico reaffirms its commitment to democratic values, dialogue, multilateralism, and mutual respect, as well as hemispheric cooperation, and will accompany and go along with those multilateral initiatives that are geared towards strengthening this in keeping with our constitutional rights for foreign policy, international law, and the OAS Charter. A strong democracy is not just the one that has periodic elections, but one that responds and meets the needs of its peoples, that recognizes plurality and builds a more fair, inclusive future so that all people can enjoy all rights. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Muchas gracias, México. La embajadora de Costa Rica.
Thank you very much. Costa Rica has the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm honored to participate in this session of the Permanent Council to address the implementation of the Inter-American Democratic Charter and the challenges that it has, particularly the impact of disinformation and the propagation of false information, misinformation. We truly appreciate the sterling presentations of Mrs. Gloria de la Fuente, Deputy Minister of Foreign Relations of the Republic of Chile, and Mr. Pedro Vaca, the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression from the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. One of the most urgent challenges of democracies in the region is disinformation, which undermines trust in institutions. It waters down public debate and weakens electoral processes. Propagation, the deliberate propagation of false information, compromises the ability of citizens to take informed decisions and affects the democratic stability that prevails. In this context, it is crucial to strengthen and make people more aware so we can verify information that will allow us to mitigate the effects without affecting the principles of transparency, participation, and plurality. And as such, then, freedom of expression is a cornerstone of democracy, and it should be guaranteed alongside strategies that grapple with information without affecting the right to a free press, without any other kind of restrictions. Is key to strengthen journalism, high-quality journalism, which is responsible, as well as to promote standards that also push ahead responsibility in journalism. Within that framework, then, the guide to ensure freedom of expression in the face of deliberate disinformation and electoral context carried out or looked at by the Group for Following Up and by the ICHR, we have fundamental guidelines so that states can implement effective responses. And here we're talking about digital awareness raising so as to strengthen the citizens' capacity to identify trustworthy information, transparency and access to information, ensuring a flow of high-quality data, independence, and the ability of electoral organizations to strengthen their own capacity to address misinformation campaigns, and inclusive, equitable participation, guaranteeing that all societies and all sectors of society can exercise their right to information alongside innovation and electoral technology, thus promoting digital tools that speak to the integrity of democratic processes. To make progress in these efforts, it is crucial to have this coordinated work among states, multilateral organizations, civil society, and the private sector. There must be initiatives to cooperate with entities such as the Inter-American Institute of Human Rights so that they can play a key role in the implementation of programs for civic education and the promotion of human rights and peace, as well as to strengthen citizen competencies with a view to promoting more equitable and democratic societies. Mr. Chairman, we truly appreciate Chile, led by Ambassador Sebastian Kraljevic, permanent representative of the mission of Chile to the OAS, for his leadership and cooperation of the voluntary group for follow-up to the Inter-American Democratic Charter. His dedication and commitment has been crucial to strengthen this mechanism, thus promoting effective and transparent follow-up for the cardinal principles that we share in the region. These efforts reflect the importance of joint work in the OAS for the defense and promotion of human rights and democratic institutions in the Americas. To conclude, to strengthen democracy in the region calls for ongoing efforts with the truth, transparency, and citizens' participation, an effort and a commitment by all states. The Inter-American Democratic Charter offers us this necessary framework to consolidate these principles and to address the current challenges with collective responsibility, with determination and through multilateralism. That's how we can guarantee that democracy is not only preserved, but also is strengthened and prospers as a true legacy of freedom for future generations. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Costa Rica. El embajador de
Thank you very much. The Ambassador of Peru has the floor. Mr. Chairman, as Vice Chair of this voluntary group, Peru truly appreciates the efforts made by the Chair to continue making progress for the implementation of the Inter-American Democratic Charter. Peru considers it vital that the work carried out by the voluntary group continues to be developed within the framework of the work plan that was agreed on January 2024. This plan establishes a blueprint to broach within a framework of 2 years the various aspects of the Inter-American Democratic Charter. This includes crucial axes for consolidation in the region. And here I should like to underscore strengthening democratic institutions and promoting a democratic culture. Given the importance that the work linked to the Inter-American Democratic Charter accords, Peru was one of the countries that participated in the dialogue before its creation. And once that took place, we had 2 consecutive sessions, and we participated in the most important events. In the high-level meeting held at the 54th General Assembly in Asunción, Paraguay, for example, our Minister of Justice and Human Rights, with this delegation, underscored the importance of informed pluralism to strengthen democracy. In Peru, we feel that this space is key to reaffirm our commitment to democracy and to identify the challenges that we have in implementation, and we want to commit and make sure that the principles of the Charter are reflected in concrete actions in our countries. We thus reiterate our invitation for more member states to join the work being carried out by the voluntary group. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Peru. Bolivia has the floor. Thank you, Chair. We thank the Deputy Minister of Chile, Gloria de la Fuente, and Mr. Pedro Vaca, the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression, the IACHR, for their presentations. Fake news and disinformation can polarize public opinion. It can cause violence, and it can undermine democratic processes and democracy. Dissemination of disinformation also affects electoral processes. It causes conflicts that can lead to lethal results and results that cannot be changed later. Disinformation in elections is a direct threat to our democracies. It causes that the results become delegitimized, and this also has an impact on our trust in electoral processes. To counter this, we need to build capacities in our citizens to detect disinformation, to know how it is disseminated and not contribute to its dissemination, and even to counter this when it is found. In this regard, Chair, I want to share a UNESCO recommendation that identifies 3 things that electoral bodies should know about this. First of all, there is a need to identify disinformation, corroborate that it is not true information, and know what is the source of the disinformation. 2, the citizens who are supposed to receive this, who can be influenced, identify them. And of course, these are linked because the citizens that receive this information could then send it to others. UNESCO believes that the media or the medium where this is disseminated, there must be action taken. And electoral bodies need to disseminate information about disinformation, train journalists, and know where the disinformation is spreading. This is a way that electoral processes can stop this delegitimization. We want to stop the reproduction and the broadcasting of disinformation. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Panama, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. It is an honor for the Panamanian delegation to participate in this special meeting of the Permanent Council to look at all aspects of the Inter-American Democratic Charter and its challenges, including the role of disinformation and fake information. We want to recognize the efforts of the Ambassador Kralevich from the mission of Chile, and also thank him for heading up the voluntary group on the follow-up of the Inter-American Democratic Charter. And we thank our panelists who have made rich presentations. The Inter-American Democratic Charter represents an important instrument to promote democracy in our hemisphere. Since its adoption, it has been an important framework for democratic order and fundamental rights in the Americas. However, the challenges we face demand renewed political will and cooperation mechanisms to ensure its effectiveness and implementation. One of the most urgent challenges we are facing is the phenomenon of disinformation and dissemination of fake news. Disinformation undermines our trust in institutions, it affects elections, access to truthful information, and the exercise of civil and political rights. Disinformation, especially when it comes from people who are against democratic principles, can undermine the rule of law that we promote. We must strengthen our institutional capacities and adopt joint strategies to counter disinformation. In Panama, we reaffirm our commitment to democratic principles and transparency. We have promoted initiatives to fight disinformation, including media literacy programs, strengthening of legislation to protect data, and promoting platform which gives access to truthful and verified information. We also support the OAS to strengthen our collective capacity. Through the exchange of best practices and technical cooperation, defense of democracy means we must have sustained initiatives with respect for the rule of law and citizen participation. Finally, we reiterate our firm commitment to the principles of the Inter-American Democratic Charter and our willingness to continue to work with other member states to ensure its full and effective implementation. Let us have constructive and multilateral dialogue for our stability and our development. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to the Ambassador of Panama. Uruguay, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. First of all, a thanks to Sebastian Krajewicz, who has moved forward in a laudable manner in his calm manner, such a great effort. And also I wanted to thank Pedro Vaca. It's always a pleasure to hear him reflect on these issues. He's a very intelligent man, and when I hear Pedro Vaca, I always learn something. And he talks about deliberative democracy, democracy in the trenches, and there are people like him who make you think. And also the Ambassador of Canada has also touched on some very interesting points. And this issue of disinformation, it's a difficult one, right? The issue of propaganda, it's a mess. Well, let's do an exercise. Let me see. Tell me, please, some solutions to disinformation and fake news or propaganda. A solution could be having media education to have more critical thinking, implement stricter regulations, and foster cooperation between governments and platforms to detect this disinformation. Is this useful? Could you describe this in the context of the Inter-American Democratic Charter of the OAS? Of course. In the context of the Inter-American Democratic Charter of the OAS, these solutions could be focused on promoting the right to truthful information and freedom of expression, ensuring that citizens are informed and can take decisions based on trustworthy information. For example, educational campaigns internationally to fight against this disinformation. Is that appropriate? Thank you very much. No problem. If you need something else, please come back. Well, this is the world we're living in. Yes, it's a complex world, says the machine. It's still talking. Yes, it's really got, strong vocation. Well, and we create these machines, but they cause disinformation. It's hilarious, but it's actually tremendous, this problem. we see democracy being subject to this. This is Chat GPT, and ask DeepSeek. I bet you won't get the same answer. It's somewhere else. It's in a different territory. That's the world we're living in, a very complicated world. Democracy today is facing these challenges. We need to reflect a lot, think very deeply, and be wise. And I'm sure these machines will be writing text for us soon. Thank you. Thank you to the Ambassador of Uruguay. Ecuador has the floor. Ambassador? The mission of Ecuador welcomes this dialogue like other delegations and thank the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Chile and the Special Rapporteur of the IACHR for their presentations. These have constructively contributed to shedding light on the challenges to the Inter-American Democratic Charter, this with respect to disinformation and fake information. Also, we'd like to recognize the efforts of the permanent representation of Chile as coordinator of the voluntary group. And also, we thank them for their efforts to comply with the GA mandate by presenting proposals to strengthen democracy with an inclusive and collaborative approach. Now, with respect to the proposals presented by Chile and the United States that Ambassador Kralevich referred to, Ecuador supports both initiatives. We believe that the voluntary procedure that Chile suggested is very useful. In other words, an exchange of best practices and cooperation, although this can't be an additional burden, it can't be a peer review. But we believe that the proposal is flexible and accessible, and it can help us regionally improve our democratic capacities and also allow us to address challenges that we are facing our democracies. Now, the proposal of the United States to create a regional group on disinformation and to strengthen capacities to verify data is actually very relevant because disinformation affects the quality of public information and, as a result, democratic stability. In this respect, we back this idea of having workshops on the use of artificial intelligence. And I think it's interesting after this example we just heard this afternoon, and also technological tools to detect disinformation. It is essential to collaborate with the private sector and technological platform and share data on sources of disinformation, as well as measure the impact of disinformation. These are aspects that can ensure a information that is more truthful and trustworthy. We reiterate that we welcome these initiatives to exchange information and cooperate with respect to disinformation and fake information. And we believe that these reflect common concerns of member states with respect to strengthening the Inter-American Democratic Charter in order to defend democracy in the hemisphere. Thank you. Thank you. Ecuador? The Ambassador of Paraguay has the floor, or rather, the representative of Paraguay. You have the floor. Thank you, Chair. First of all, I would like to thank Chile and the ambassador and his team. Thank you for heading up the voluntary group and the efforts to organize this meeting. We believe the Inter-American Democratic Charter has not lost any relevance, but we must continue to undertake efforts to implement it effectively. And so we need to have a holistic view and know what are the new threats to our democracy. We need to defend truth. And so we believe that this meeting has been very important because we're all concerned about disinformation and fake news and the impact it has on our societies. In our current context, we have ever-changing technology. The roles of states are diverse, they're needed, and we see disinformation can threaten health, education, and also electoral processes. Nevertheless, we must remark that the responses of our states to these phenomena must must not violate human rights. We must not violate privacy. The fight against disinformation cannot be an excuse to silence critical voices or to deprive people of essential information to exercise their rights. Chair, we are convinced that disinformation demands coordinated responses, cooperation between the public and the private sector, and specific measures for each context. We also need to think about the root causes of the proliferation of disinformation, inequality, exclusion, and others. To conclude, we want to reaffirm the importance of having the appropriate conditions so that we can uphold pluralism, tolerance, and human rights. This is an antidote to the terrible effects of disinformation, and this allows the citizens to have trust in their authorities and their institutions. Thank you. Thank you, Paraguay. United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair and colleagues. The United States would like to thank Chile for its leadership of the voluntary group for the follow-up of the Inter-American Democratic Charter and for coordinating the request for this special session. Today we convene to reaffirm our unwavering commitment to the principles of the Inter-American Democratic Charter, a document adopted on September 11, 2001, the same day that the United States was attacked by terrorists seeking to destroy our way of life. That dark day reminds us that democracy is fragile and must be defended against those who seek to undermine fundamental freedoms, weaken our institutions, and impose authoritarian rule. The United States stands firmly in defense of democracy, sovereignty, and the basic human rights and freedoms that underpin our work in the hemisphere. We will not tolerate the growing influence of authoritarian dictatorships in the Americas. As Secretary Rubio has stated, the United States must never turn a blind eye to tyranny. The regimes in Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua have robbed their people of their basic rights, jailed political opponents, and conspired with foreign adversaries to undermine regional stability. Our approach is clear: maximum pressure, unwavering support for democratic forces, and no compromises with dictators." End quote. Illegitimate regimes in our region, backed by global adversaries like China, Russia, and Iran, repress democracy at home and destabilize and dismantle democratic institutions in our hemisphere. These actions threaten our national security interests and America's economic prosperity, creating a ripple effect across our hemisphere. One way that they do so is through the weaponization of illegal mass migration. Nicaragua's permissive migration and visa policies offer migrants from around the world a springboard to migrate illegally to the United States, threatening our security and that of every country through which these people pass. In Cuba, for decades, and particularly in economically tough times, the dictatorship pushed waves of Cubans to leave their homeland, especially those who had the courage to speak up for freedom. Similarly, Nicolás Maduro has used the threat of increased migration to undermine or threaten Venezuela's neighbors. Such actions have led to the mass exodus of over 7 million just from Venezuela, resulting in an unprecedented crisis that has destabilized our region. With this in mind, we call on our regional partners to regain control of their borders, accept the return of their nationals, implement visa requirements, break up migrant smuggling networks, and create conditions for their citizens to build a future in their homeland. In Venezuela, Maduro and his cronies also continue to commit human rights abuses, imprison opposition leaders, and suppress free and fair elections. We call on the OAS to increase pressure on Maduro's corrupt network and ensure that the Venezuelan people are not abandoned to the whims of a criminal regime. In Cuba, the regime's economic mismanagement causes unnecessary hardship and suffering. We demand that the Cuban regime free all unjustly detained political prisoners, many held since the peaceful protests of July 2021. And in Nicaragua, the Ortega Murillo dictatorship continues its brutal crackdown on civil society, religious communities, and anyone perceived as an opponent. We urge the OAS to take concrete action to hold Ortega and Murillo accountable and to support the Nicaraguan people's call for a return to democracy. Chair, a free society also cannot exist without freedom of expression. The United States has made it clear that we will not allow governments or international bodies to censor speech. As President Trump's executive order on restoring freedom of speech affirms, and I quote, "No government entity has the right to silence its citizens. The weaponization of disinformation policies to suppress political dissent must end. Free speech is the foundation of any democracy," end quote. Colleagues, with today's special session, we reinforce the role of the OAS in defending democratic governance across the Americas. To this end, the United States is committed to pushing for stronger action against authoritarianism, advocating for transparent electoral processes free from fraud and external interference, defending freedom of expression to ensure that the OAS remains committed to protecting open debate, and strengthening cooperation with democracies in the region, especially to end illegal immigration, as we work toward tangible, concrete outcomes to uphold the Democratic Charter at the upcoming OAS General Assembly in June. In closing, Chair, the United States calls on all responsible nations in this body to stand together in defense of democracy, human rights, and the fundamental freedoms that define our hemisphere. We must work together to uphold these shared values and confront the threats that undermine our region's stability and prosperity. Thank you.
Gracias, Estados Unidos.
Thank you, United States. The Ambassador of Colombia has the floor. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. First of all, I thank you for convening this special meeting, and I thank the Deputy Minister of Chile and Pedro Vaca, the rapporteur from the IACHR, and the ambassador from Chile, who has headed up the voluntary group to follow up on the Inter-American Democratic Charter. As everyone has said, he's done a wonderful job, and we want to congratulate him. The Inter-American Charter, which was adopted in 2001, is a fundamental document to defend democracy in the Americas. And it provides a framework to be able to work together to defend democratic principles. And so this allows us to react when there are crises in some member states of the OAS. However, there are many, many threats to democracy. Some come from ideologues, some are due to economic, social, political, and technological factors and are very complex. One of the most important challenges in recent years is the rise of disinformation and fake news in digital media, in all kinds of media. And this affects democracy, and it is disruptive with respect to political participation and elections. And this is very serious because it negatively impacts our democracies. The dissemination of erroneous information alters public opinion. We've all said this. It can undermine trust in the media, in political institutions and authorities. And what is worse, it influences election outcomes. To counter this, we must work to strengthen digital literacy, democratic education, and human rights, so citizens have the necessary instruments to identify truthful information, distinguish it from fake information, and understand the responsibility of sharing fake information or hate speech. I am from a country which is quote unquote democratic, but 150,000 people have been murdered. Where were the media? Today, we are trying to shed light. All that information through the Truth Commission, and even still, we don't get all the information. And that's a kind of manipulation of information. Information's being hidden and covered up. And when positive things are done, they're distorted through disinformation because there needs to be verification of the information. Colombia believes it is extremely important that the OAS, we can share best practices, and I hope there are best practices. And I appreciate the Ambassador Kraljevich's work because he's brought this to the fore. Yes, and we know what we might be facing. For example, policies, programs, legislation to protect the rights of users from the manipulation of algorithms and the undue use of private information, and the best ways to counter hate speech and polarization. We really need to get a handle on hate speech and the polarization of our societies. International cooperation and strengthening of institutions that regulate this are important to move forward in democracy and human rights. In many regions in the Caribbean and in the Americas, there's a huge gap with respect to access to high-quality, truthful information and a concentration of media outlets in few hands. And that limits impartial information and a diversity of sources. We need to create conditions so that all sectors of society can participate, especially those that have historically been marginalized. Furthermore, to ensure that democracy functions, we must have strong judicial bodies. They must be independent. We must avoid their politicization or their abuse of power. The member states of the OAS, we need to work in a committed way to defend democracy, and the best way to do so is promote cooperation. We thank Chile and the United States for their proposals to strengthen democracy in the hemisphere. Mauricio Montalvo from Ecuador already said this. We think there are valuable elements that can help us strengthen capacities and exchange experiences to face this common challenge. The Inter-American Democratic Charter continues to be a powerful instrument to defend democracy in our region, and the voluntary group has allowed us to have open dialogue, exchange experiences, best practices, and has been for the benefit of all. Chair, we believe we can continue to move forward openly and collaboratively and based on consensus, trust, and joint work. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Colombia. The Ambassador of Brazil has the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I truly appreciate the presentations of Vice Minister Mr. De La Puente and Mr. Vaca. We have taken due note. The delegation of Brazil would also like to recognize the sterling and very important work being carried out by the permanent representative of Chile, Ambassador Kraljevic, as he coordinated the voluntary group for the follow-up of the Inter-American Democratic Charter. the work of the mission not only gave us a summary of the work, but also coordinated workshops and seminars on the topic of integrity of information in the digital world, which has had a big impact on the quality of our democracies in the public debate. In this context, we were very happy to hear the panel on these issues, and with all of the programs, and particularly commemorating the 20 years of the Inter-American Democratic Charter at the time. The seminar on misinformation and disinformation has many different tools to fight against misinformation on the web. There were also other workshops and other models of financing that were talked about. As regards political parties, I'm quite sure, Mr. Chairman, that these activities not only fulfill the mandate that was accorded to the group by the General Assembly, but also enrich everybody in the group that participating. So to conclude, Mr. Chairman, with regards to the proposals, my delegation already had an opportunity to give its opinion in the voluntary group as well as in the CAJP, and this was also in the words of the permanent representative of Chile, that he said here in the summary that he gave us. I echo the comments of some delegations which, during the meetings of the groups and in the light of the dearth of time and resources, reference was given to the proposals that had far-reaching support and went towards a consensus in the spirit of the General Assembly and its mandate and the multilateral spirit that requires not only unilateral imposition of any models, but rather diplomacy, negotiation, and dialogue. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brazil. Ambassador of the Dominican Republic has the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I truly appreciate convening this special session, and I'd like to congratulate the presentation made by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Chile, Mrs. Gloria de la Puente, and the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression of the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, Mr. Pedro Paca. Both were very clear about the topic that we have before us this afternoon. Thus, I take this moment to thank Mr. Vaca and thank the rapporteurship under his leadership on these topics. I would like to say, and once again, thank the Ambassador of Chile for his exemplary leadership and his chairmanship in the voluntary group on the follow-up of the implementation of the Democratic Charter. This session offers us an opportunity and a space to reflect on the importance and the challenges that we have when implementing the Inter-American Democratic Charter, particularly in the light of the challenges that we have when it comes to misinformation or false information and disinformation. The Inter-American Charter is a cornerstone for the defense and promotion of democracy in this hemisphere. It establishes critical principles such as separation of powers, citizen participation, and respect for human rights. Nonetheless, the true strength of the Charter is in its real effective implementation, which also has its own challenges. One of the most pressing is the proliferation of disinformation and proliferation of misinformation. This phenomenon undermines, as has already been said, trust of citizens in democratic institutions and erodes fundamental values in our societies. Manipulation of information facilitated, given the exponential growth of social media and other means of communication media, has become a tool to distort reality, to polarize communities, and to weaken democratic governance. This situation represents growing concern throughout the hemisphere, and it affects citizens' trust in the institutions. The rapid dissemination of news without verification through social media and digital platforms makes it very difficult to identify trustworthy information. In the light of this challenge, we have the difficult task of combating disinformation so that we can have freedom of expression, a fundamental right in any democratic society, to regulate the flow of information without falling into the trap of moving towards a well-balanced view calls for raising awareness, responsible use, and implementation of verification mechanisms which are accessible for all citizens. To address these challenges, the leadership of the voluntary group, in compliance with the mandate accorded by the General Assembly, spearheaded many initiatives so as to strengthen the efforts when it comes to implementing and counter disinformation. Here, I want to highlight digital education, promotion of true information, and the ability to get that information. These are key to have societies that are more resilient and informative, given the manipulation of the information. Democracy has a permanent commitment that requires continuous ongoing work to deal with the emerging challenges. Effective implementation of the Inter-American Democratic Charter continues to be our blueprint, and their success depends on our own collective determination to defend its principles. The Dominican Republic reiterates its commitment to democracy and the rule of law, and to the instruments that promote and preserve the principles and democratic values, particularly those that are mentioned in the Inter-American Democratic Charter. We continue to work together so that we can build more resilient societies that are well-informed and committed to the democratic values that we uphold. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much to the Ambassador of the Dominican Republic. Now I'm very pleased to give the floor to Noas Rachante from the Ministry of Argentina, who visits us and to whom I should like to give the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My delegation truly appreciates convening this special session of the Permanent Council with a view to broaching implementation of all of the aspects of the Inter-American Democratic Charter and its challenges, including the role of disinformation and misinformation in compliance with the mandate established by a resolution on strengthening democracy adopted at the last General Assembly. And as such, then, we truly appreciate the presentations made by the authorities that spoke before me, on which we have taken due note. Mr. Chairman, human rights as a policy of the Argentine state are one of the basic pillars of the Argentine foreign policy since democracy came back. With the constitutional reform of 1994, the most important international instruments on human rights were made part of the Constitution. The protection and promotion of human rights touches on all public policies and looks at the main concerns of the Argentine society, and that is why its defense is the crux of the foreign policy of our country. Regionally speaking, our country supports the Inter-American system of human rights incorporated in our national constitution in 1994. This has played a key role in protecting human rights. Since December 2023, the Argentine government looks to craft a policy to support human rights based on the protection of life of all, protection of property, and protection of freedom for everyone. This emerges from the idea that all citizens are born free and equal in the face of the law, and we have inalienable rights. These are for all human beings, where we have the right to life, freedom, and property. The topic of the meeting of the Permanent Council of the OAS on the role of disinformation and misinformation is at a crossroads, or upholds these three tenets: life, property, and freedom. The right to a dignified life has to do with access to freedom of expression and access to free information. On the other hand, there is the legitimate expectation that this access is done in democratic terms. In other words, for all in equal conditions and opportunities. This legitimate expectation, like all subjective rights, has or is important for all people. From our standpoint, the best remedy for disinformation and misinformation is more freedom for information and expression. The free remit of information and access to horizontal democracy for information. We have to be very mindful, very careful with this saying that we hear in hate speeches, because according to that motto, we sometimes feel like having governments that cut individual freedoms of each person, which represents more state. And that is why it is crucial that social media can be used by each and every citizen with absolute freedom, without any restrictions, because this allows for the free coexistence of narratives with the conventional media. And as such, then, the aspect of freedom is broadened for the benefit of right to information, and it fights against misinformation and disinformation. A larger level of information will always lead to more information. On the contrary, more restrictions on social media or unconventional media will always result in less information, less freedom, and less democracy. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Ambassador Noel Lacho, Secretary of Culture and Civilization from the Ministry in Argentina. My dear colleagues, I thank delegations for their valuable statements. The diversity of perspectives shared today reflects the firm commitment of member states to the promotion and defense of democracy in the Americas. Their contributions have been instrumental in enriching our discussion on the implementation of the Inter-American Democratic Charter and the founding charter of the organization and the challenges we face as countries and as a region. I would also like to express my sincere gratitude to the distinguished panelists, Mrs. Gloria de la Fuente, Deputy Minister for the Foreign Affairs of Chile, and Mr. Pedro Vaca, Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, for their valuable interventions. Their input has provided us with an in-depth analysis and has been key to better understand the challenges and opportunities we have to strengthen our democracies. I should also like to thank Ambassador Sebastian Karlovich, Chair of the Voluntary Follow-Up Group to the Inter-American Democratic Charter, for his detailed report and for the continuous work that this group is doing. I invite you to continue working together within this group with the commitment to continue strengthening efforts for the implementation of the Charter. This session has undoubtedly been an important step to deepen the implementation of the Inter-American Democratic Charter. Today's discussion has underscored the importance of urgently addressing the phenomena of disinformation and the need to further strengthen mechanisms to ensure access to truthful information, access to the truth. My dear colleagues, those of us who have been in public administration have been victims of the opprobrium of false information that can often damage not only our own image and our dignity, or the dignity of human beings and the dignity of our nations. We know how extremely serious this situation is. And that is why it is important that mechanisms are generated from these organizations to ensure that the truth always prevails. May the truth always prevail. It is important for democracy and the rule of law. Based on false information, an election can be manipulated. The electorate can be made to make a mistake, an electoral result that can be changed, even based on disinformation and falsehoods. Democracy have been broken, and this is something that we cannot allow in the Americas, nor can we have all the information. And I go back to the words of Ronald Sanders, Ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda. We cannot live mistrusting the information that we receive. It's everybody's work to find objective solutions given the magnitude of the problem, as was also mentioned by the Ambassador of Uruguay. With this, dear colleagues, we have fulfilled the mandate established by the General Assembly. It is essential that we continue to work together constructively and collaboratively to advance the implementation of the Charter and to meet the challenges before us. I invite the entire membership to continue to dialogue on these crucial issues with a firm commitment to continue promoting democracy, transparency, and especially respect for human rights in our region. Without further ado, I thank everybody for their participation in this special meeting, and the meeting is hereby adjourned.